I'm the president of Liftport Group. I think everybody that's watching this knows by now that we were involved with some early space elevator research. We then switched over to focus on the lunar elevator. When the plague hit the world, we almost went out of business, and our surprising pivot was to start doing online conferences. We hosted 27 online conferences. And then when the plague changed in the world, we switched again to focus on podcasts. So we now do 12 hours worth of programming every month, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays at 5 o'clock Pacific time. And you can find most of our shows either on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/liftport, or on our Spotify channel, and that would be under the title of DareGreatly Space. So thanks for joining us with this. What we've really focused on since really, I guess, October of last year, we kind of have three shows. We have a news program, a wrap up. We don't do those very often. Candidly, they're usually fillers. We have I hate to say it, deadly dull policy topic when we dig deep into a new document, whether it's a NASA document or a Space Force document or a technical analyst document in the industry. And then finally, the thing that I like the best, I think the audience likes the best, is when we have a guest. And we've had some tremendous guests. Namrata Goswami as an analyst. We just last week had Lieutenant General, 3-star General Stephen Quast. A couple of weeks ago, we had Deputy Administrator of NASA, Lori Garver. Just a really tremendous list of folks that have been on the show. So we're really grateful and happy with that. And today we've got a returning guest, Dr. Andrew Aldrin. We've had him on the show, I think he was one of our very, very first guests. Maybe it was October, maybe it was November last year. We were still trying to figure out what exactly we were doing. Now, more than half a year later, we kind of figured it out and we started to grow. Aaliyah, my right arm in this company, Leah just reminded me it was a Halloween episode. So thanks, Leah. Appreciate that. And we've been doing this for a while, and it's been going really well. We've been able to stay on track, start to grow our audience. We got some cool stuff coming up here soon. But it's also allowing us to kind of get back to the core business of working on the elevator, because we basically suspended that work for several years. So we're kind of doing this bifurcated plan where we're continuing to do the media side. We call that Better Futures. And then also get back to our technical roots. And so I'm really happy to say that today, with the help of some of our allies and friends, I'm not going to name them yet, we submitted our first NASA proposal in 4 years. So fingers crossed. Hopefully that gets us back into the hardware side of space stuff. Okay, let's bring in our much respected guest. Hold on just 1 second. Hi.
Hello, Michael.
How are you?
Splendid.
Perfect. Okay. We've changed the rules a little bit since the last time you were here. We spend more time going into personal backgrounds, what we call the origin story. And you have one of the most unusual origin stories ever.
I got nothing to say about that.
Yeah, I'm sure. And some some political events have happened in the last few days that I want you to dust off your old PhD hat on and talk about that for a moment as well. But this is how I want the program to go. I want to talk about your origin story a bit. I want to talk about who you are and how you got into space, because you did it in a way that almost no one in the world could replicate. But we do want to we want a lot of our audience is new to space. They're new to this industry. And so we're trying to showcase as many different paths in as possible. And so you have an unusual path in for yourself, but you're also an architect of other people getting into the industry now. So we're going to talk about all of that. I would like your take on some current events, both OceanGate and how it applies to space. And if you have any insights on the craziness that's going on in Russia, I would really like to hear that. and then finally, whatever core topics you want to chat about. So let's start with let's start with your origin story, because again, you have an unusual one, probably not replicatable. But how did you get here?
Well, I guess the obvious thing is I was born into it, right? So
Yeah.
What's significant about that is, all of you out there who know my dad and have been fortunate enough to talk with him knows that he does nothing but talk about space. Occasionally he listens, but mostly talks. And so I grew up with that drumbeat because I was the only one in the family remotely interested in that stuff. And so we were always talking about space, but I didn't want to become an astronaut. I really didn't even want to get directly involved in space. My passion, that came as a result of just educators inspiring me. My passion was I wanted to study the Soviet Union. And so I became a Sovietologist. At the same time, I had an interest in space. And so I kind of brought the two together, and I actually wrote my dissertation on how the Soviet Union beat the United States into space. And it was a particularly fascinating time because I started going to Russia. My first, I guess, real trip, I went in '86 as a language program, but '88 I went at the invitation of Roald Sagdeev for the Institute for Space Research. And I was working at the RAND Corporation, so I was consistently going to the Soviet Union. And it was a fascinating time because this was just as Gorbachev was coming in. The Soviet Union was going through all kinds of changes and also ultimately disappeared in front of our eyes, literally. And I'm sitting at the RAND Corporation with, there were probably 10, maybe a dozen of the best specialists on the Soviet Union in the country. And so we talked about all of that stuff, and it was fascinating to watch that. So that was a great time, but it wasn't great for my career because my research agenda kind of went away, and I had been showing some companies around what was now Russia, and so I got recruited into aerospace industry, and then as a Sovietologist, I ended up running business development, which included not just business development, but strategy, marketing, advanced programs, all the front end of the business for Boeing's NASA and civil business and part of their commercial business, and then for their launch business, and then got sucked up into ULA. So it's kind of weird that a Sovietologist and political scientist ended up in those positions, but it makes a lot of sense, and it's been kind of an important theme in my career and what I do now, because as a political scientist, I understood the government customer really well. And so engineers don't necessarily do that well. Right. And so I think that was a real advantage. And I briefly ran Moon Express, which was an experience. And I learned that I can run a company. I also learned it's really hard work. Right. And so then I tried to retire, and my dad kind of dragged me into helping him out set up the Aldrin Space Institute. And then ultimately, while I was there, I set up the ISU Center for Space Entrepreneurship. And now today I've moved to Embry Riddle, where I've put together an online program, which has been tremendously successful. I'm really, really proud of it. It's a full master's degree program called the Master of Space Operations. It's online. We've got 750 students in the first 2 years.
Wow, that's
amazing.
really grown from
Just
what I
amazing.
thought.
And it is, it's a lot of work, but it's really, really rewarding because we're able to get so many people into the industry or give them the basic knowledge that they need. So we may return to that later. But anyway, that's sort of the story of my career. And you know, it is kind of unusual, I guess. But I think more and more in the space community, we're seeing employers that are looking for people that understand the big picture.
We're gonna dig deep into Embry Riddle towards the end of this program, but I wanna kind of go back to your, you know, one of a kind, two of a kind childhood, because I'm gonna skip ahead for a moment. About 15 or 16 years ago, Guillermo Sonlin offered me a job. And I don't know if anybody's been paying attention to the news. Ultimately, I did not take that job, but he was running what was then called the Space Angels Network and is now Space Capital. So he's been out of Space Capital for a long time. I think he's still around. I think he's still got, you know, some weight in that industry. Mm-hmm. But about 10 or 12 years ago, he and Stockton Rush created OceanGate.
Right.
Here in Seattle. It's like right outside my window practically.
I didn't realize it's from Seattle. Okay.
Yeah,
I knew Guillermo was involved in it. I didn't realize that it was in Seattle, but makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, there's a giant marine industry here, mm-hmm. Because of the Navy's footprint that's been here for 100 years, literally since World War I. And then the expansion in World War II, there's a lot of naval architecture here. So it's one of the places that made sense to build this thing. And so Guillermo hasn't been involved with OceanGate for about 8 or 9 years. So he had no role, no knowledge, no inside information about this recent tragedy. But many of the people on that vessel have connections back into the space community. Some of them have flown to space. Some of them are involved with the SETI Institute. But I'm not looking at that. That story's kind of been done. People know that. If they want to know, they know, right? They've looked into it. I was thinking about it from the perspective of you individually, because I knew you were coming onto the show, and so that was in my head. That sparked a little bit. But I mean, the tragedy of what happened, and I'm not here to like place blame or call anybody out. You know, 5 people died. It was a terrible accident, and it's going to happen again. Mm-hmm. And it's going to happen again in our industry, right? So 3 people have died trying to construct the Virgin Galactic system, right? A pilot, another injury, and then there was a refueling incident beforehand. Right. So you're one of those few people that can speak from the perspective of a family member who has done something incredibly dangerous. And I mean, you literally were you know, covers of Life magazine and Time, right? So what was that like in your early childhood? And what lessons do we pull from what's going to happen someday, hopefully not soon, but someday? I just really like the philosophical perspective. So what was it like as a kid first?
Well, I mean, so as a kid, it was normal. So I lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. We lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, and we had one of these pie-shaped lots. So there are 5 houses behind us, and 3 of them are astronauts. So, I mean, literally, you couldn't swing a dead cat at my elementary school without hitting an astronaut's kid. It was normal. Alan Bean lived directly behind us. And so for my dad to be an astronaut wasn't unusual. For him to be selected to go to the moon was just seemed fortuitous at the time. And so I'm but 11 years old, I guess.
11.
And,
okay, that was going to be my next question.
And
11.
so my perspective was, because as I told you, my dad was talking about space a fair amount, and I understood a little.
Right.
Mostly I understood that NASA was infallible and nothing possibly could go wrong. And so I believed that, with one exception. And that exception was the ascent engine. That spooked me, because I knew if that didn't fire, then that was going to be ugly. And so, ironically, and I think this story is certainly out there now, the circuit breaker, which enabled the ascent engine ignition, broke. And so after they had done their moonwalk and they're lying on the floor, my dad sees this broken off piece of plastic and recognizes it as a circuit breaker. And, you can spin a story that says this was required something heroic. The truth was, he had an unauthorized felt tip pen, and he took the felt tip because couldn't use a steel pen. And so anyway, he tripped the circuit breaker, and everything was fine. My biggest concern as an 11-year-old kid was that my dad was going to do what dads are supposed to do to 12-year-old kids. They're supposed to embarrass them, right? And so he's hopping around on the moon, and there's this cable going from the lunar module out to a seismometer or something like that. And I'm sure he's hopping around, because he told me he was going to hop around, and I'm sure he's going to trip over that, fall flat on his face in front of 300 million people, most importantly, my 25 classmates.
Right. Yeah.
Which would have been horrible. But my only chance for survival was it was the middle of summer and maybe they'd forget. But fortunately, that didn't happen. So the point of this whole thing is, it's all about context. And so for me, that was all kind of normal. And I didn't realize that, as I learned much later in life, that, when John Glenn flew the Atlas, it had a failure rate of 40%.
Right.
Now, admittedly, they did things to make sure quality control and all of that kind of good stuff was much better on his mission. But, there are times when, we all agree they are men of unquestionable courage. Sometimes I question their judgment. But none of them, the truth is, none of them even considered the prospect of not going. And so when you decided you wanted to be an astronaut, you signed up for all of that stuff. And
Right.
So it's very different in that sense from what we're seeing today with, we'll say adventure tourism.
Right. Yeah.
It's a very conscious decision, but it's, and so if I look forward, and I know a few astronauts, the future astronauts on whatever it is, and astronauts that have flown on, well, I guess the only ones that would fly would be on Blue. Ironically, I was with Hamish right after the accident with the test flight.
Okay.
And one other person was with me, who was also signed up to fly. And I think they're both Trevor Beatty. And I think he is still signed up to fly on Virgin. I don't think he's backed out. And so we talked about it. And they were not fazed in the least. Nothing. And so I think for the class, if you will, the group of dedicated adventure tourists today, I don't think it's going to have any effect at all. And so the question becomes like so many, this is a question that comes up a lot in space, which is, are we going to be able to use the fortunate circumstances that we have right now to get through to a solid program? And so, and that goes for not just the idea that we have a group of people that are willing to fly without fear. And so at some point, we'll probably have more accidents, as you pointed out.
We have
At
to.
some point, it will get to be much more reliable, and then it'll become much more accessible, and hopefully the price will come down and all that kind of good stuff. And so this is a fortunate coincidence. And there are other fortunate coincidences, like, the biggest fortunate coincidence for space travel was the fact that we had a Cold War. And because we had a Cold War, we had to fly into space.
Right.
And the question became, government programs created kind of an artificial salient into space, and would the commercial market, the real market, fill that salient in time? And I don't think we really know the answer to that yet. And today we have another, I think, very fortunate opportunity, which is we have some people who are very, very wealthy, who one could say are willing to invest money non-economically, or one could say, I think, a little bit more analytically, with very, very long time horizons. And so that gives us another opportunity. The question again is, can the opportunity they're creating with their long time horizon allow the rest of the business world, which doesn't have that luxury, to kind of fill in another artificial salient? So it's all really interesting, and I suppose you could call it philosophical, but we do live in, I think, very fortunate times.
Absolutely. I started this about 2001. That was when I started into the space sector, and it has changed so much in that 2 decades. It's unrecognizable from when I started. I mean, I really, really am surprised what's happening.
I mean, let me just kind of look at the other side of the coin.
Okay.
I mean, still, if you look at the $400 billion space economy,
Right.
A lot of that is sort of derived economy, if you will, where you've got everything from it. Basically, it's data coming from space, as well as economic activity created by space facilities here on Earth, a bunch of secondary effects and things like this. And when you get down to the real hardware piece of it, it might be, I would say it's actually right now, it's probably about 150 billion of a $400 billion economy. And the vast majority of that 150 is government.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is government investment in large part because the infrastructure part, satellites, launch vehicles, are a lousy business. I mean, they are. It's tough. The margins aren't high in aerospace typically. The growth rates in that business, if you look at, I actually just pulled this, I pulled together a data package on this because it's not readily available. I have to pull a bunch of stuff together. The growth rates aren't horrible. It's about 5%, which isn't horrible.
Yeah.
But if you look at things like remote sensing, remote sensing application, there you're at 11%. Notionally, I will say notionally, space-based broadband is like 18, 20% annual growth rates, which that's another lecture, getting into that whole thing.
Yeah.
But the point is, and it actually has a negative economic value added to it as a business. The return on equity is not great. And so you compare that to the other businesses where you have much higher growth rate. And so when Chad pulls together all his data with Space Capital, which I've just been kind of fishing in there for the last couple of hours,
right.
I mean, it's wonderful data. But if you look at it, the vast majority of investment is going into applications.
It is.
And so the core part of it is still government. And to be sure, you see trends like smaller satellites and things like this, but it is still very much on the hardware side, it is government. And beyond that, it is U.S. government.
Right. Yeah. We have 70 to 80%, meaning the U.S. has 70 to 80% of all the capital that's going into this sector. It will for a long time. Canada just a couple days ago announced, I don't know, $16 million of investment into 26 companies. I mean, that's nice for Canada, but that doesn't build an industry.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
No.
And I think so. I think it's important to step back and go, oh, hang on, what's really going on here? And I mean, to be sure, there are a lot of interesting things, but you probably heard me talk about this before. This is the third wave, commercial wave, right? And it's not clear. The first wave kind of didn't happen with the shuttle. The second wave with Iridium wiped us out.
Right.
And it's right now, I mean, the metaphor for you're going to use a wave is it looks like it might be closing out on us. We don't know. It's going to be a hairy ride. But I'm actually one of the.
I don't know. I might disagree with part of that. I mean, definitely, I'm an optimist, but Silicon Valley does what it does pretty well. So it is funding data companies that coincidentally use space, but they are putting so much money into those data companies that those data companies are propping up the hardware companies.
I have to think about that one for a while.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm pretty confident with my numbers on that. I think
you'd have to take it because what you would have to look at would be where's the revenue being generated. So if the revenue is being generated by value-added third parties that aren't necessarily buying spacecraft, they're just buying data, then I think it's a little bit tougher argument. If it's being generated by companies that own the spacecraft, maybe that's a good thing. It's also a bad thing in that companies that are generating data are only selling their data, and a Silicon Valley guy is not going to be able to relate to a Brazilian farmer in Manaus.
Right.
And so I think that a data-intensive industry is probably going to grow out of like the big consulting firms and stuff like that. Will it support a large commercial base? I don't know. I mean, but right now the numbers for commercial satellites are not only small. I mean, the revenue numbers, they're not growing very fast. There's much more growth on the place to be right now is the NRO if you can get in. It still is.
Yeah.
And if you can get in.
Yeah.
I mean, the barriers to entry are astonishing in that business.
Yeah.
But it's a big fat paycheck if you can get in there.
I have been actively skeptical of the space tourism market since I started in this industry. And there were these promises of space planes coming out of I think Kansas, and there were these promises. I was on the tarmac when when the X Prize was won. So that one I made
I was there for flight one, not flight two.
Yeah. So I mean, I've been optimistic about the technology for a long time, but not in the commercialization. I do have a lot of confidence in point-to-point suborbital sometime soon, whatever that means. But I don't know. There are people getting their pitchforks out over this OceanGate situation, right? That they're like, and there are so many crazy memes of people just being angry and just being like, well, the ocean ate rich people. Who cares, right? That has been the response I've seen.
But I mean, the people that are saying that are not people that are buying flights.
No, right.
So as I said, I don't think that little thin crust of people that can afford it. I did actually, just more as a thought experiment than anything else, I looked at some Northern Sky research data and I said, does this make sense? And so I just went out and said, how many people are there with a net worth of more than $3 billion that are under 80, that aren't Chinese? And I said, all right, that's your total addressable market.
Okay.
And so I think they were, I forget what their numbers were, but I want to say they were getting up to $1 billion-ish a year. And that's not crazy for orbital flights. I mean, that's,
Right.
the numbers are small, so it's easy to kind of do a bottoms up estimate. And so, we've got Axiom now flying a couple of missions
Right.
at a 50 million a pop. So, they're going to generate $300 million. And so I can see
Right.
that kind of billion, $2 billion-ish a year business for
I think that model's pretty good. I mean, going after foreign nationals that want to start a space program, it is the cheapest way to build a space program right now. So that I thought was pretty darn smart. 10,000 folks with deposit checks at Virgin, I have been skeptical of for a long time.
And I guess I'm skeptical about everything, which is why my students call me the cosmic curmudgeon. But
What'd you say, Professor Curmudgeon?
No, cosmic curmudgeon.
Cosmic curmudgeon.
Yeah, I actually have a website, an internal website at Embry Riddle called the Cosmic Curmudgeon's Corner, where everybody throws their ideas and I shoot them all to hell.
Okay. We gotta do a segue. I gotta absolutely 100% do a segue here. Leah, who you can see but the audience can't. She's right there.
Actually, I can't.
Oh, you can't see her? Okay, she's laughing. I can see her on the control panel on my side. She just got accepted into the Embry Riddle program.
Fantastic.
She just got her acceptance letter about 2 weeks ago. She's smiling really big right now. And so she's like, yeah, we got to put together a business plan, as part of our capstone program. So are you one of the people that review the business plans at the end of the school, at the end of the program?
Our program doesn't have a capstone. We have.
Sorry, I'm saying capstone.
For most classes, you have to do a business plan. It's either a business plan or a company analysis. I'm trying different things to see what works. Sometimes when you throw it out there and say, you guys come up with a business, any business, you end up with some strange tendencies. So at any rate, so here's the way it works. First of all, the program is 100% online. It's asynchronous. And so I develop, out of the 10 courses I've developed, or I'm developing 8 of the courses. And what that means is it's basically a book. And for every week, I'll do like a 30-minute lecture, which takes most of the time, because the lecture is where all of the good stuff is.
Right.
That's where I'm digging up data from Space Angels and putting together what I think about this stuff. And then I'll teach a few courses, but with 750 students, I've got a lot of adjuncts. So I've got about 15. I'm putting together a real first-class team of adjuncts to teach it. And they are the ones that are actually going to read what you're doing. If you're smart, you talk to your advisor and you try and get into my class. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability yet. I'm taking things over a bit at a time to actually decide who teaches what and what students I can have in my class, because it's a big operation. And so we have people, and it's compartmentalized.
Sure.
Yeah. We have people that actually assign students. So there's no guarantee. But I've been told that I have a very solid following.
She saw you on our show last October, and because of that, she kind of mulled it over the Christmas season, and then submitted her application at the beginning of the year. So she just got her letter 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that. Okay. So I didn't even know she did it. She was doing this on the sly. But I'm pretty happy for her.
I really do believe it's a great program, particularly after starting the program, the ISU program. Here's the thing that blows me away. First of all, I told you it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for me. It's a lot of work for the other adjunct instructors that are doing a good job with it, because you have to spend a lot of time, because you've got a couple of assignments at least every week, and you can't just say, all right, here you get an A. You've got to explain why you got an A, what you did well, but most importantly, what you need to do better. And that takes a lot more time, not to mention the whole course development piece of it. But the dependent variable in this, what really gets me excited is the quality of work. And I'd say that the top 20 or 30% of my students blow me away. Best work I've ever seen. And I'll get a few that just, I'm astonished at the amount of work that they'll put in, and they get it. They get what I'm trying to do, which is really, it's all about the questions. It's not about having the answers. In fact, I just did a lecture that Leah will enjoy whenever she gets around to it, about data sources.
Data sources. Okay.
And so I have two columns. One is one column with the thinking guy. And what I want you to do is think about your market analysis. Come up with the right questions. Don't just find some number and throw it on a paper. And then for the column of stuff that I don't like, I just have a barfy icon, because I'm going to barf all over your paper. Because it annoys me when people just get lazy about that. And what really matters in this whole program is teaching you how to think about the right questions. I don't care if you get it wrong. What I care about is that you've got a good thought process behind it. And there are some things where, I just mentioned to you that I was trying to figure out whether the market made any sense that Northern Sky put together for orbital tourism. And I just said, what's my market really look like? And it all made sense. But that way I know what the data involved. It's not just a number. I don't know where they got it. But Northern Sky is really very good. And so I anticipated that it would be good data, but it's important that you think everything through, that you don't just blurt something out. And the other thing that gets me really excited are the program is a lot about getting people in a transition, people who are in a different career, want to get involved in space. They're working in a cubicle, or maybe they're doing test ops or something, and they want to get into the analytics side. They want to move jobs. They want to get involved in business development. They want to start a business. People that are in transitions. And what we're doing is we assume engineering, business, or law, or something like that. What we're trying to do is teach you about the whole ecosystem that you live in. And it's really, as I said, a million times, it's about thinking about what are the really important questions in this whole business. So I have a new thing coming out that I can announce now. We haven't got it approved by the faculty, but I'm pretty confident that we're starting another master's program, and it's called the Master of Space Systems. And this is more technical. It'll have the same kind of 4 core courses, looking at a market survey, looking at technology and systems, looking at space law and policy and systems engineering. But on top of it, right now, the course is really set up so we've got industry verticals where you learn about an industry, whether it's geospatial, telecom,
launch, or
launch, all that.
Yeah, okay.
So instead of being about the industry, what you're going to do is you're going to design a launch vehicle, or a telecom system.
Okay.
And just to make it really interesting, we'll set a set of requirements up front that you won't be able to meet.
That you won't be able to.
No, because that's the real world. And the instructor will negotiate with you as to what's going to satisfy them. And so, again, it's stressing the thought processes, the analytic processes that are really most important. So I'm really excited about that program. I probably won't end up, I don't know how much of that I'll teach, because I am not a dyed-in-the-wool engineer, but I do know what the right questions to ask and what the right trade-offs are. And
when is that program going to start?
Probably not this coming fall, the following fall.
Okay, so 2 September.
I haven't even started. I haven't gotten it through the board of trustees yet, but
okay.
I do have.
Well, with the success track record of 700 plus students in the first one, it makes it pretty easy for you to be like, hey, I have this idea. Let's do this next thing. Right? Yeah.
For the moment, they like me.
I had not to do comparisons of apples to oranges, but we just had somebody on, Bailey Burns a couple of days ago. She's a younger woman, new in her career. She's been in her career for maybe 4 years, 5 years. Started out at Raytheon, moved over to Paragon to do environmental controls and life support, and recently moved to Blue Origin to continue doing life support work. And she's coming from the School of Mines and focusing on their resources group. And they have 30 and 40 students in a class, right? Like not in a class of I'm going to learn XYZ, but in the graduating class, she had 32 people in her class. So
32 people at School of Mines?
In her year, she was the inaugural year.
And this is a graduate program.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow,
So when I hear you say 700, I was kind of blown away by that. Like, that is by far the biggest space program in the world. ISU gets two. That's right. ISU gets about 130, 100
for the summer program. The graduate master's program, I think, is something between 50 and 100. It's not even close to that.
It's 60. It was 60 when I was looking at it. I don't think it's grown any more than that. So, yeah, that's bonkers to have numbers like that.
It is. But the most important thing, as I said, is the quality of work. And actually, I didn't finish the thought. The other thing that's really great is when I get students that come in that are propeller heads or something else, they don't have a background in space. And at first they're just intimidated, but I'll say half of them come out really knowing what they're talking about. And that's cool. That's just cool.
Yeah. Rattle off, I couldn't find it quickly while I'm talking to you, but rattle off it's what, 10 courses, 12 courses, something like that?
10 courses.
Give us the topics.
Yeah, so there's 4 core courses. That's space policy and law. And what I do in that course is I provide what I call a National Space Innovation System framework. It's really a systematic way of looking at a nation with policy as an outcome of the whole infrastructure. It's like an iceberg.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Then there is technology and systems, which is really about getting students to understand the cost of technology, and not just the technology. I mean, those are sort of engineering things, but one of the things they really need to understand is it's not, you can't build $1 million shuttle. And so, I mean, which I get. Then there is survey the space ecosystem, which is really a quick run through all of the market segments, which is sort of like it's a very quick run through what the rest of the program is all about. And then we have a program management course right now, which I'm really going to swap out for an engineering management, systems engineering class, sorry. And so those are 4 core courses, and they will apply to both programs, where it's the Master of Space Ops or the Master of Space Systems. Okay, for Space Ops, we're still not quite finished filling out the program, so I'm going to give you what the final version is going to look like. So on top of those 4 courses are industry verticals. So we've got launch industry, geospatial, communications, human spaceflight, space science, and then there'll be kind of a cats and dogs sort of innovative stuff that's not somewhere else. And I may still have room for an elective in there. So that's the way the program is structured. In each one of the industry verticals, you will have a term-long project that will be either designing a space system or doing an analysis of companies in this market area. And every week you do a presentation that's building towards your final project, which is either like an analyst report or a concept proposal, if you will. You do a segment of that depending on what we're looking at that particular week. One of the things that's kind of, I think, really critical about it is we start talking a little bit about systemic forces in history. How do you make money? What are the markets? Market segmentation. And it's not until you're done with all of that that you actually get to think about the technology of your system. And
Awesome.
and then finally, you have strategy. All the courses have very similar structure to them,
Okay.
with a couple of exceptions. We've got a space hab systems, which will probably end up over in the space systems program, and there's also a cybersecurity, which will definitely end up over in that. Cybersecurity is really, really important, but
Yeah.
I think that needs right now. It's a little light technically, but talk to the guy that we've got a great faculty for that. We've got three really incredible people that are kind of leading stars in the industry. That I'm excited about that program, partly because I learned I didn't know anything about space security.
Right.
And
I mean,
it's scary.
that's why before Space Force was created, the cyber and the space components of Air Force were in the same command side by side, right? So because they you can't do one without the other. You can do cyber without space, but you cannot do space without cyber.
Well, and it's because it's all about data. But the thing that scares me is literally I've had some of my students hack into satellites and take control.
Oh my God! Probably don't want to. No. People that you know that know other people. You don't want to be like incriminating yourself.
No. The guy I'm thinking about literally
Yeah.
works for a contractor that knows this stuff really, really well, and it was a sanctioned event. But think about it. What happens if somebody breaks into a satellite and
Right.
starts playing bumper pool? When you've got, let's say 50, 60,000 satellites out there,
Right.
you could get to a colossal disaster pretty quickly. And right now, the people that are building satellites aren't really regulated, and they don't have a lot of incentive to really harden their satellites. And it used to be when I was growing up, you had a satellite and it had the payload segment of it, which handled the data, and there was a firewall between that and the rest of the satellite. Well, that's not the case anymore. And so that's one of the biggest threats we've got in the community. I mean, could you imagine a nefarious person or country?
Right. Yeah, I absolutely can. Do a little detail about our show. One of the people in the chat is Terry. Terry spends a fair amount of time. I don't want to like give away the farm, but he spends a fair amount of time with some of the folks at Privateer and Maura Baja.
Okay.
And they're working pretty hard to tackle some of that that problem. So I pull out your crystal ball and go forward. 3 years to 2025, 2030, and 2035. How many satellites do you think are going to be in the sky that far out? 2025, 2030, 2035.
I don't know, just because I do have some skepticism about the constellations and how robust that market is,
Right.
and whether the market can afford 50 or 60,000 satellites. It's not obvious to me, because satellites can't compete with cellular, and obviously they can't compete with hardline. So what you're left with is all of the remote settings, and those remote settings, there's a really ugly set of dynamics. One is there are three things that are going on in that industry that are the three horsemen of the apocalypse. One is, so the market is not huge, and it's getting smaller as cellular systems penetrate further and further. Two is the amount of data that people use is growing exponentially, which normally you'd say is a good thing.
Right.
Three is the price they're willing to pay for it is going down.
Okay. Yep.
At 10% a year too. So it's going down essentially exponentially. When the problem with these constellations have, that SpaceX is already running into, is capacity, which is why they're building a whole new set of systems and 40,000 satellites and all of this stuff. But when you hit a capacity limit, now you're in this situation where your customers want more data and they want to pay less for it, but you're at capacity. It's a death spiral.
Right.
And so that's going to be a kind of ugly. And
so some of those, I mean, it's a commodity problem, right? Like,
it is.
Okay, if I want sugar, I'm not going to pay, $500 a pound for sugar, no matter how much I want it.
Right.
But then when it drops down to $1.25, I'm not going to buy 500 pounds of sugar if it goes to $1.26, like I 22, right? Like it doesn't matter how low it goes. I'm still not going to buy it at that.
Well, we are buying a lot more sugar now.
Okay.
But you're right about a commodity. A byte of data does not care how it gets there, whether it's fiber optic, whether it's satellite, whether it's cellular, whether it's carrier pigeon.
Right.
If you just get it where it needs to get there, when it needs to get there, and with reliability. I mean, it's all simple stuff that you got to understand. And you don't buy satellite data because it's better.
Right. It's just a 1 or a 0. So the Satellite Industry Association said it was going to be 40 to 80,000 satellites. The folks at Secure World are looking at a lower number, probably in the 40,000 to 50,000 range. I trust both of those sources, and you're saying that's probably too high then.
You just got to get to 40,000. You got to say, all right, SpaceX is going to fly 40,000 or something close to that, and then somebody else, and then you got to ask, okay, what is the market that's going to support that? And right. I used to be on the board at Secure World, and I could ask them those questions.
Okay.
Secure World has some really, really smart people.
Right. Yeah.
And it would be Brian and Ian Christian.
I think it was Brian Whedon that gave me that number.
Yeah. I don't know if Brian is saying, so, maybe I think SpaceX and a Kuiper and that's it. And then you're at 50,000. What I would push to do is go, all right, you've got 50,000 satellites and you've got, let's call it $100 billion of investment in that. $100 billion, you've got to generate $10 billion a year of free cash flow just to pay off your investors.
Right.
Okay, where is that $10 billion coming from? We actually did an analysis of this, and I think for the 4,000 satellite version of Starlink, it maxed out at $3 billion a year. For 40,000, I think you were up to $30 billion a year of revenue potential. And admittedly, we were using assumptions, which actually were a little optimistic about what their system capacity was. But with Starlink 2, if it is as big as it purports to be, that may get more capacity. But still, you've got a $10 billion a year nut to crack just to keep your investors off of your back.
Well, that's really interesting, given all the rumors that are flying around the last couple of days about is Starlink going to IPO? Is our Starlink going to spin off of SpaceX? I mean, that's a like in the news comment that's happening right now. So that's
I've been reading that stuff.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting because you don't. The SPACs went out without really providing any data.
Right.
I don't think the market is going to let SpaceX get away with that. They're going to have to back it up. But there's this notion of the efficient market theory, right? The capital is smart. It's not. It's stupid. Look at how many billions of dollars are getting invested in small launchers. The market, we did an analysis of this. The market will support 3. You got like 150 companies out there.
I disagree with that.
Now, because we didn't have the SDA constellation in our model, and an SDA would be a good customer for small launch vehicles. But still, so maybe you're at 4.
If you are only talking domestic U.S., I think that number is going to grow, but there's value in France having its own program, of Australia having its own program.
Fair enough.
Nationalistic reasons are going to make
on
sure
the basis of something other than market.
Yeah, right,
Fair enough.
right. Yeah, I remain very confident that there will be 20 or 30 or maybe even 40 launch companies.
That's going to cost you a beer someday.
Okay, all right. I'm not saying it's going to be
That
tomorrow,
is,
and there's going to be a lot of people
I
that
don't
crash
care.
and burn between
I'm
now.
not going anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Right.
But I do not. I mean, I could see a couple of regional, and of course, France will do it because France has to. They just,
Right. Right. India's going to create their own.
India's already got their small launch.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's going to be reasons for national security and national pride where many nations have them. So that's a dozen or 2 dozen by itself. Israel will have their own commercial.
No, Israel's already tried that, and that was a pretty miserable.
I'm not counting them out yet. So we'll have this conversation again.
Invite me on in another year, and we can just.
Okay, all right, we will.
Right now, the number is going down, not up.
Yeah. Didn't somebody just buy somebody just the other day? Anduril just bought a rocket company a couple days ago. I think it's just a rocket engine company. I don't know. I wasn't paying that close attention. All right. Okay, so we're running down to the last few minutes. You were a Sovietologist. That word almost doesn't even make sense in the 21st century. But does that give you any insight into what is going on with Russia and Ukraine and space right now? Do you have anything that's beyond whatever we're reading in the news?
Not really. I mean, it's the in many ways the organization that Putin's got looks like Stalin, and so it's kind of a little bit of a classic communist structure without the party, without the organization of the party. Right? There is no organization to Putin's kitchen cabinet, if you will, and so in that sense, it's even worse than under Stalin. But with Stalin, there was the Politburo, and there were people that were in and out. So it has a lot of similarities with Stalin and the cult of personality. It's just he can't get away with killing as many people. So do I think, what happened with Prigozhin? I think Prigozhin just thought he was holding aces, and it turns out he had 3s and 4s, and he thought he had support from people in Moscow and probably within the military, and he didn't. And so, I mean, people look at, in a sense, it does show weakness of Putin in that Prigozhin would try and take him on, but ultimately it showed the strength that nobody defected. There was nobody backing up Prigozhin. And so that's a little bit like the old system. What does this have to do with space? Not much.
Not much? Okay. I kind of thought maybe it did. I mean, space is the only reason, in my opinion, from an outsider's perspective, space is the only reason Ukraine has lasted more than a year against Russia, right? Because they've gotten just nonstop high quality intel.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't think that from an outsider, okay, I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps more than 30 years ago. So I would not count myself as any sort of military expert of any kind. But I've been watching how the community has rallied around the Ukraine and provided very high quality data all the time, minute by minute. And that's the only.
I have no doubt that we play games with them, and we have a history of promising lots of data and not necessarily providing lots of data. But the intelligence community would be foolish to go completely open kimono. But I also have, there's no doubt that they're providing lots of data. And look, NGA can provide the data that they're buying commercially. Right. And with maybe some processing, but there's enough commercial data out there, if it's appropriately organized, that can really be helpful. So You just need somebody to provide you what you need, and you can probably do that without getting into a lot of highly classified stuff.
Yeah, they've done a lot with open source intel. So I was just curious if you had any background or knowledge. Okay, all right, cool. Well, this is great. I can't wait to bring you back. I'm going to bring you back probably maybe not the first couple weeks in September, but the end of September once school starts, and you can kind of tell us what's going on with school there.
And I'll be happy to talk about it then. I actually think that I don't think I'd have to teach until October, which is kind of
wow. Okay.
I'm spending the vast majority of my time right now doing program development work, which is what I should be doing.
Right. Cool.
But I'll be doing lots of promotional stuff.
Terrific job. It's amazing how fast this thing has grown.
One of the things I have to say.
Sorry. Go ahead.
One of the things I have to say about Embry Riddle is it is such a delight working with the people at that university. They are so professional. They are so helpful. It is just, it's far and away the best job I've ever had.
Nice. Fantastic. Yeah, you didn't have anywhere near these kind of numbers when we were talking in October last year, right? So the idea of just great growth, that's amazing.
Yeah, I haven't looked in a couple of months, so
it's
gone up. It's gone up by 1. We know that much.
Yep. That's it. So the largest space school in the universe. That's going to be the takeaway quote. I love that.
So listen, if Leah wants to get in touch with me, please pass on my email.
Absolutely.
I spend a lot of time talking to students one-on-one.
Okay, terrific. All right, I'm going to end the program. Stick around for a second.
This has been fun as always. I truly enjoy it.
Cool. Hang on just one sec, okay? Bye, y'all.